This year marks 16 years since Roosevelt Skerritt seized control of the electoral process and thereby deprived Dominica of the right to choose freely and fairly government of the people, by the people, for the people. And through these years of advocacy for electoral reform and peaceful protests calling for the electoral process to be returned to right order, to be made fit for the purpose of free and fair elections, there has been no progress. Skerritt has played the people for his fools on a merry-go-round of trickery, deception, false hopes, and empty promises, while he systematically abused, tainted, and manipulated the electoral process to secure his winning legacy in general elections. Remember Skerritt's advisor, Anthony Astafan, in his famous email correspondence of March 27th, 2008? Quote, "There is madness going on at the commission. You need to call in Dominica Labour Party nominees on the Electoral Commission, Richard Charles and Kondwani Williams." What is the madness? These guys are talking about reforms to include ID cards and complete re-registration. Such reforms will undermine your re-election legacy, as the opposition will say, look, the commission agreed with us. Reform was required because of widespread fraud. 27th of March, 2008, 16 years ago. In July of 2022, the Caribbean Court of Justice, our apex court, admonished us about the impact of a tainted electoral process incapable of delivering free and fair elections on the legitimacy and sovereignty of the constitutional state. Quote, "There remain areas of grave concern about how the process of these 2019 elections were conducted. Future elections in Dominica ought not to proceed with these or similar taints. Taints on an electoral process severely undermine the integrity and the legitimacy of elections." So, do the proposed new and revised election laws address the critical matter of removing the taints on the electoral process to clear the way for free and fair elections in Dominica? Let's look at a few of those taints. Number one, the taint of distortion of the right to vote. Persons voting for representation in the Parliament of Dominica despite being ordinarily resident outside of Dominica. To remove this taint, we ask for total re-registration of voters and provisions for cleansing of the voters list annually. We recommended that, consistent with the Constitution, only those persons who are ordinarily resident in Dominica and those who are no longer ordinarily resident in Dominica for less than 5 years should be eligible to vote in elections in Dominica. The principle of voting where you live or are ordinarily resident is a cornerstone of the electoral process and must be respected as such in the moral and legal responsibility to ensure free and fair elections with integrity. This recommendation was denied in favor of entitling overseas voters not ordinarily resident in this democracy and whose human rights to live, work, and enjoy life are under the jurisdiction of another government to distort, defeat, or cause harm to the wishes of the voting residents of Dominica. We recommended no overseas confirmation of registration of voters. We indicated that it is discriminatory according to Section 13 of the Constitution and allows for corrupt manipulation. The proposed registration of electors bill provides for overseas confirmation, but Skerritt seeks to give the impression that there will be no overseas confirmation. Taint number 2, voter fraud. Voting multiple times, voting in the name of the dead, or voting with false identities. To remove this taint, we recommended voter ID cards. According to the electoral reform consultant Sir Dennis Byron, quote, "The introduction of voter identification cards to persons registered as electors supported with biometric data was considered one of the most important reforms by almost everyone. This was regarded as essential to eliminate or minimize a wide variety of fraudulent conduct at elections, including impersonation and multiple voting. The proposed legislation of Registration of Electors Bill 2024 does not provide for the inclusion of biometric data on identification cards for voting. We advised that the security features on the card cannot be at the discretion of the Chief Registering Officer. There must be requirements in the proposed law or in the regulations of the proposed law for photograph, fingerprints, ID number, voter registration number, polling district, voter name and address to be included on the voter ID card. That recommendation was denied. Taint number 3, election rigging, tampering with ballots, altering vote counts, unlawful recounts, or other forms of direct manipulation of the voting process. To remove this taint, we recommended provisions to ensure strict compliance with and obedience to the rule of election laws in these matters. That recommendation was denied. Taint number 4, bribery and treating. Offering money, gifts, or other incentives to voters or election officials in exchange for votes or favorable treatment. The payment of air and sea transportation for voters living overseas and the payment of free entertainment for voters represent major deformities in the electoral process that have determined the outcome of elections. The Commonwealth Observer Mission to the December 2014 election cited multiple instances of treating and bribery, including the transportation of electors to the island to vote, among reasons why the election was not necessarily fair. To remove these taints, we recommended that the amended House of Assembly Elections Bill must, at the very least, clarify free entertainment treating as an election offense and, with respect to the offense of bribery, reflect the guidance of Halsbury's Laws of England that the payment or promise of payment to a voter of his traveling expenses on condition expressed or implied that he would vote for a particular candidate is bribery. That recommendation was denied. Taint number 5, corruption and the influence of big money. The regulation of election campaign financing is necessary because money cannot be allowed to have controlling influence in our political system such that elections can be determined and or purchased by big money interests or criminal enterprises. Electoral reform must include solutions to the critical money in politics issues that are negatively affecting our elections. It is not about giving political parties money to campaign from the public purse, as was erroneously stated by the Prime Minister and repeated by advocates of the Dominica Labour Party during the election reform consultations. It is about our responsibility to reform and improve our campaign finance system with election laws that hold elected officials and wealthy special interests accountable to the people and create a level playing field for fair competition and ensure everyone plays by the same common sense rules. Accordingly, we recommended provisions for an election campaign period that begins at least 12 months before the election date, limits on election campaign contributions, a limit on election campaign expenditure by political parties at $50 per registered voter, declarations of campaign contributions and election campaign spending, and a definition and prohibition of illegitimate election campaign contributions. These recommendations were denied. Taint number 6, abuse of public resources. Using state resources such as public funds or government-operated facilities to support a particular candidate or party. The Commonwealth Observer Mission to the December 2014 election believe that instances of abuse of incumbency, including a lack of impartiality in the provision of public services, played a part in the outcome of the election, which was not necessarily fair. The Commonwealth Observer Mission went on to say it is appropriate appropriate to note the clear breaches of civil service staff regulations where public servants are openly politically partisan and assist in the distribution and provision of government services and goods. To remove the state, we recommended provisions to strictly prohibit using public officers, the resources of the state, and projects resulting from the expenditure of public funds as campaign tools to corruptly, improperly, and unduly influence voters and thereby gain political advantage. That recommendation was denied. Taint number 7, media bias. Skewed or unfair media coverage that disproportionately favors one party or candidate over others, potentially influencing public perception and voting behavior. To remove the state, we recommended provisions in the House of Assembly Elections Bill for access to all media for all political parties. We recommended prohibition of all media houses, print, radio, TV, digital, electronic, from denying any political party or candidate paid time and or space for the broadcast or publication of their messages. Media houses, we said, must be legally obligated to ensure that political parties and any independent candidate participating in elections have equal access to media services during the campaign period. Penalties must be prescribed for failure to comply with the rules. That recommendation was denied, except that some access to state-owned DBS radio will be allowed. Taint number 8, foreign interference. Attempts by foreign entities to influence the election results through hacking, disinformation campaigns, or financial contributions. To remove the taint, we recommended that foreign persons, companies or governments, citizenship sales agents, and holders of government contracts financed by citizenship revenues should be expressly prohibited from participating in election campaigns and contributing either directly or indirectly to any candidate or party during a general election. That recommendation was denied. Taint number 9, intimidation and violence. We recommended provisions against threatening or using violence against voters, candidates, or election officials to influence the election outcome, as happened especially in Salisbury and Marigot during the 2019 elections. That recommendation was denied. Removing these taints is crucial to ensuring free and fair elections, but nothing has been done. Now, Roosevelt Skerrit is getting ready to go to Parliament to pass new and revised election laws that will normalize the formula for the unlawful and corrupt electoral conduct he has engaged to steal elections in Dominica. All we wanted was to align our electoral process with the requirements of free and fair elections with integrity as the backbone of democratic governance in our Commonwealth of Dominica. These new and revised election laws do not provide for the reforms we need, and so they must be decisively rejected. They must not be allowed to come to the Parliament of Dominica. And in this round of the people and their electoral process versus Roosevelt Skerrit and his gang, the people need to get serious. No more standing aside and looking. No more sitting idly by waiting for others to protest for our right, while one man steals elections to allow his chosen few to enrich themselves from the rape and plunder of our resources. As the children of God on this green piece of planet Earth, we, the people, are committed to operating and continuously improving a democracy that works for all of us. A democracy where everyone has an equal voice and an equal opportunity. And those to whom the people periodically transfer the power to govern are held accountable to the needs of the people. There is no doubt that the legitimacy and sovereignty of our constitutional state of Dominica is in question, has been for a number of years, as a result of these unfair electoral practices that the ruling party has engaged with, and which they're doing nothing about in the reforms that are proposed through these pieces of legislation that are about to go to Parliament. It's a sham. It's a slap in the face for the people of Dominica who genuinely look forward to proper reforms that make the process for elections in Dominica fit for the purpose of free and fair elections. And Dominicans should not stand for it. Dominicans should rise up against it and ensure that proper legislation for reform of the electoral system goes before Parliament. And this is not a Roosevelt-Skerritt's country. This is not a Roosevelt-Skerritt's electoral process. This is the process of the people of Dominica. And if the people of Dominica want it fixed, that's exactly what is going to happen. The people of Dominica are going to get it fixed. Nothing more, nothing less.